Hello, good morning. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Now we're starting our 2023 edition of the CBA Day. And it's always an honor to meet you and be with you during such a special event for all of us at CBA. If you don't know me yet, I'm Amabile Silva, the Investor Relations Manager, and it's going to be a great pleasure to conduct this event today. Today, besides having our CEO, Luciano Alves, and our CFO, Camila Bell, supporting us, we'll also have a presentation by Julian Cattle, the VP of Metals and Mining from the Wood Mackenzie Consulting Company. CBA has been transforming its operation and performance in the aluminum market and standing out in ESG, which positions us as a benchmark in the low carbon aluminum supply in the market. Today, we're going to get to know more about our operations and the company's strategy. Your participation is really important, and I want to invite you all to send your questions and comments through our chat option. Now, to start our event, we'll watch a quick video that shows you a bit of our production process, demonstrating how we've reached this point in the market and how we are a real highlight in the market.
O alumínio é considerado um dos metais do futuro, cada vez mais presente em nossas vidas. Um dos maiores produtores de alumínio do mundo é o Brasil, onde está a CBA. A CBA é a única produtora de alumínio no país e uma das poucas no mundo a atuar com uma cadeia integrada de produção. Isso significa que a empresa atua desde a mineração da bauxita até o produto final, incluindo a reciclagem. É também destaque no cenário internacional pela oferta e produção de alumínio de baixo carbono. E eu vou te explicar como tudo é feito. Vem comigo! O processo começa com a extração da bauxita em áreas da empresa ou de produtores rurais. Nessa etapa, um dos principais diferenciais está no método de lavra. A CBA adota um processo de mineração sustentável, desenvolvido em parceria com a Universidade Federal de Viçosa, em Minas Gerais. Depois da extração da bauxita, a CBA faz a recuperação do solo e o devolve aos produtores rurais em condições iguais ou melhores para plantio. Além disso, a empresa também realiza ações de restauração florestal e de conservação hídrica nessas áreas. A bauxita extraída segue para a etapa de beneficiamento, onde passa pela britagem, para reduzir seu tamanho. Depois, é peneirada e estocada em pilha. O rejeito do minério não utilizado é estocado para estudos de reaproveitamento em novas aplicações. Das plantas de mineração, a bauxita beneficiada segue de trem até a fábrica da CBA em alumínio. Lá ela é triturada em moinhos e misturada em uma solução de soda cáustica para extrair o óxido de alumínio presente no minério, a chamada alumina.
Em seguida, o que é feito é uma filtração onde a gente separa a parte de resíduo da parte que a gente chama de licor. Ela vai para a etapa seguinte desse processo, que é uma precipitação. A precipitação do alumínio na forma de hidrato. Nova filtração em que a gente separa o licor pobre desse hidrato e o hidrato vai para a etapa seguinte, que é a etapa de calcinação, onde você vai retirar a molécula de água que está quimicamente ligada à alumina. E com isso você tem no final o produto final, que é a alumina, que vai para a próxima etapa do processo.
Parte dos resíduos gerados nos processos da refinaria passa por um sistema de filtragem. Ele retira a água que é tratada e reaproveitada na fábrica e gera um material C, parecido com um torrão de terra. Esse material tem potencial para ser aplicado na produção de cimentos. E a CBA já tem a patente e os estudos de viabilidade para esse tipo de aplicação. E tem um outro diferencial aqui nessa etapa de refino. 100% da energia utilizada é gerada a partir do vapor das caldeiras, que são movidas a biomassa. Essa tecnologia substituiu as antigas caldeiras, movidas a óleo ou a gás natural, gerando uma redução significativa nas emissões anuais dessa etapa. E tem mais. Graças a esse sistema, a refinaria da CBA é reconhecida por ter a menor emissão de carbono do mundo. Voltando ao percurso da alumina, esse material segue para as salas fornos, onde é misturado a outras matérias-primas e aditivos. E depois é aquecido a uma temperatura muito alta, através de um processo de eletrólise, que produz o alumínio líquido primário.
E é aqui que a gente garante a produção de um alumínio de baixo carbono. Um dos motivos é que a CBA tem capacidade para 100% da energia necessária no processo produtivo, a partir de fontes limpas e renováveis. E isso nos torna autossuficientes em energia, trazendo uma vantagem competitiva em relação ao mercado. Isso contribui muito para a CBA reduzir as emissões de gases do efeito estufa na produção do alumínio.
Importante ressaltar que o alumínio líquido produzido pela CBA está entre os de menor emissão de carbono do mundo. Isso nos coloca como referência em sustentabilidade na nossa operação.
A partir das salas fornos, o alumínio líquido é enviado para a etapa de fundição, onde é misturado a outros materiais, inclusive sucatas de alumínio. E depois ganha formatos de lingotes, tarugos, placas, rolos caster e vergalhões. Eles formam a linha de produtos primários da CBA e tem dois destinos: a venda direta para os clientes da empresa, como o mercado de transportes, bens de consumo e construção civil principalmente, ou o envio para a etapa de transformação plástica.
Na área de transformados, ou também conhecida como downstream, nós temos dois grandes processos produtivos. Um deles é o processo de laminação e o outro é o processo de extrusão. Dentro da laminação, nós temos a opção de fazer a laminação vindo de placas, onde nós produzimos as placas dentro do nosso poço, enviamos para um equipamento que é o laminador a quente e nós laminamos esse produto se transformando em chapas, conforme necessidade dos clientes nos segmentos específicos para aquela qualidade de produto. O outro processo de laminação, ele começa com a fundição, onde nós pegamos o nosso lingote, derretemos, transformamos em bobina, e aí nós começamos um processo de laminação. E dentro desse processo de laminação, nós vamos afinando o nosso produto conforme cada uma das necessidades dos nossos clientes, transformando em placas, por um lado, e por outro lado, levando à produção de folhas, atendendo segmentos específicos automotivos, de embalagens, onde nós conseguimos reduzir até 6 micras, o que equivale 6 vezes mais fino que um fio de cabelo. Seguindo o processo produtivo, nós vamos então agora para o processo de extrusão. E dentro da extrusão, nós recebemos o tarugo e dentro desse tarugo nós produzimos primeiramente as ferramentas dentro da nossa fábrica, conforme cada um dos projetos e dos desenhos específicos. Nós passamos então isso para as nossas prensas e aí sim terminamos com corte e algum tratamento de superfície, que pode ser uma pintura ou pode ser uma anodização. Isso garante uma cor diferente ao produto e também garante uma proteção ao alumínio que você consegue estender a vida e a utilização dele dependendo do segmento que você vai utilizar.
Muitos desses produtos são co-criados em parcerias com clientes, customizando soluções conforme cada necessidade. Para esses casos, a CBA conta com especialistas em seu time de desenvolvimento de mercado e inovação, trazendo soluções para os mais diversos mercados, como embalagens, transportes, automóveis, construção civil, bens de consumo, energia, entre outros. A empresa também possui 2 centros de soluções e serviços, um dentro da fábrica em alumínio, outro no centro de distribuição da CBA em Caxias do Sul. Nesses espaços são feitos os projetos personalizados, que envolvem cortes especiais, furação, soldagem, montagem de peças, entre outros processos, garantindo um alto padrão de qualidade e agregando valor ao alumínio da CBA. Outro exemplo de solução fornecida pela empresa são as marcas da CBA para o mercado de construção civil, que oferecem sistemas de esquadrias feitos sob medida, de acordo com as características do projeto e as necessidades do cliente final. Esses e outros produtos CBA possuem o selo Alenium. Então, quando você for ao mercado e encontrar esse selo na embalagem de algum produto, significa que ele foi produzido com alumínio de baixo carbono da CBA. Além da utilização de uma matriz energética renovável, a reciclagem também é um caminho importante que garante a fabricação de um alumínio de baixo carbono.
Além do alumínio líquido, utilizamos como insumo sucata no nosso processo. A utilização de sucata ela é um dos pilares estratégicos da CBA, porque ela vai nos fazer avançar ainda mais na sustentabilidade e no longo prazo. Um dos destaques na estratégia de utilização de sucata é a linha de tratamento de sucata que existe na Metalex, onde nós conseguimos comprar uma sucata com impurezas e através dessa linha de tratamento nós retiramos aço, borracha, plástico e qualquer outra impureza que venha com essa sucata, de modo tal que só o alumínio muito puro vai ser utilizado no nosso processo.
Com tudo isso que acabamos de ver, fica evidente a importância dessa cadeia produtiva para os desafios globais e a construção de um mundo mais sustentável. A CBA faz parte desse movimento, produzindo soluções em alumínio que transformam vidas.
Great video. It summarizes a little bit of our production process. Now we're going to begin a little more getting into our strategy and perspectives for the future. And that's why I'd like to invite Luciano Alves, our CEO at CBA. Thank you, Amabile. Luciano, welcome, and the floor is yours. Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another CBA Day. I'm here to talk about our strategy, perspectives, and a bit of what we've evolved in the past few years. Um, so, you've seen how CBA is really a unique asset. And one of the main factors that makes us stand out, and we have different examples like this in our presentation as well, is the fact that we have all of the integration in our supply chain from our bauxite all the way to aluminum products, transformed products, recycling, etc. We also have electric energy that's 100% renewable in our matrix, and this makes us a lot more competitive and also low emissions. And the third point is basically the investment projects, the fact that we're in the entire supply chain and we have this broad spectrum of aluminum products really makes us have products and projects in the entire supply chain phases. And this, of course, helps us manage these investments according to the commodity cycles. So, moving on to the next slide, we can have a view of how CBA has these different competitive advantages and differentials, as I mentioned. And three of the ones I mentioned, which are integration, renewable energy, and our pipeline of investments. So, as we talk about integration a bit, you'll see that through integration on the next slides, that we can capture synergies among different phases in the supply chain, which goes from mining all the way to the aluminum products. And besides this, we also have a positioning which is since we produce a lot of different aluminum products in our supply chain, we can have a leadership position in billets as well as the silicon aluminum alloys and also in the sheets market. So moving on to the next slide, just 1 second. I think I had a uh, problem here with my slide system. But on the next slide, we're going to talk about our competitive advantages in the supply chain. So we have, for renewable energy, as I mentioned, the possibility to have low emissions and competitive advantages in our costs. As you can see on this slide, there's the emissions curve on the top. And in the emissions curve, it's interesting to see that who has a renewable energy in their pipeline or portfolio can produce very low carbon aluminum, which is the case with CBA. Some of them have a mix between renewable energy, natural gas, and other energies, which are in this intermediate position. And the third and fourth quartile producers from the end of the second quartile are those that produce aluminum with thermal coal and generation of energy. And these producers have a lot higher emissions than we do when you compare CBA with these companies that produce aluminum with thermal energy. The emissions are normally like 5 times greater than ours. So the fact that we have renewable energy guarantees this positioning in the first quartile. Then on the bottom part with costs, it's interesting to see that CBA has always been a first quartile asset. We've always demonstrated this, and occasionally in 2023, we're in the second quartile, which is really influenced by what happened in the pot lines this year with the operational conditions we've already mentioned, and also the cost inflation that impacted the entire industry, along with the currency variations in Brazil. So we think this is something that's just occasional. We have different initiatives and projects that we're going to bring into the first quartile. So we're going to work towards this, and we want to show you this soon. Which is really where CBA deserves to be, right? Which is the first quartile. And then moving on here, we're going to talk about all of the integration in our supply chain and how we can see this in our investment projects. So we have projects that are in the entire phase of our productive chain. We have investments in all of these, and it's interesting to see that having these investments, since we're a commodity market, we work with cycles. And commodities markets are always cyclical. And so having investments in different phases of the supply chain really allows us to incentivize investments on one side or slow down some investments in other moments according to different cycles. So we can work with these commodity cycles a lot better. Of course, a reference in ESG, as we've seen this and we talk about this a lot at CBA. We have many different certifications besides the investment projects, and then of course a governance standard, which is first in class here at Grupo Votorantim. Moving on to the next slide, we also talk about our strategic pillars a bit. And so you've already got to know about this strategy. We've already disclosed this broadly to the market. But what's important to mention is that we have the evolution in many different pillars. And so, just to remind you, our strategy is based on these four pillars: accelerating growth. Normally, this is going to be growth with synergies in different businesses we have, strengthening our competitive advantages. So, we're competitive when it comes to emissions and costs. And we have projects and initiatives to make this asset, which is already very competitive, become even more competitive in the future to all of the ESG aspects that were already a reference in the market for. We want to incentivize this, not only working to improve this position of reference, but to really influence the supply chain, not only for aluminum, but also their materials in some way as we manage our assets. And finally, I'm going to talk about this in more details with all of the innovation and digital transformation and partnerships, which is fundamental as a pillar of our strategy, and it can really be something that brings in major gains in our in the future for our company. Moving on to the next slide, we are going to talk about our strategy a bit. So, besides these four pillars, each of the CBA businesses have different characteristics, which is why we have different strategies for each business. On the left side here of the slide, you can see the strategy for each of these businesses. But I'm going to mention this with how we've evolved and what we have to do in these businesses. In primary, we can strengthen and modernize this. We have some investments we've already done. We modernized and restarted Potline 3. We also considered another project with it, which is the dry disposal, which is going to handle this factory in alumina. And so we have other modernization projects as well that will improve our indicators. And here we just want to grow the business, make it bigger, and more competitive in the future. And for recycling, we also talked about this a lot. We want to grow more in this sector. We've purchased Alex last year. We had many investments with an increase in the Metalex pot lines. We had a scrap treatment line at Metalex. We have other investments that could come in the future as well about this. And here, what's interesting is that we have a lot of investments that can take place at our factory, which help leverage our volume of recycling, and because of this can lead to greater returns than the average in the industry. And in transformed we can items, we can eliminate some of the bottlenecks. We also have the wheel project, and in this project we're going to um, also be able to recycle the multi-material packages like the milk cartons, which was a partnership we had with one of our customers, and it became something that was super interesting for our business and our future competitiveness. And for power, we already talked about the advantages of having this, which is so important, and it's a basis for us to be able to produce low carbon aluminum. But also, since we have a position of commercialization, we can also capture gains and synergies in these two processes. So on the next slide here, I'm going to talk about this a bit with our digital transformation processes. We have a digital transformation strategy for quite a while at CBA. You can see it's a pillar of our strategy when we consider digital transformation and innovation. And how do we look at this in our business? Well, we have three main pillars. First, strengthening the culture. Culture is super important, not only for CBA, but also specifically for this axis. And why is that? Well, because we need to embed and enroot this mindset, this digital mindset, where people start searching for new initiatives, ways to automate their work. And there's a lot of work that's already been done here, and this is going to be something that's recurrent in the future as well. So, second, we want to promote changes in the business, right? So, through the technology and initiatives, we want to change the business and how we operate in our aluminum business. And the third point is based on these 2 points, not only for culture, but also with the initiatives for the changes in the business. We want to transform all of this into projects and returns. So a lot of the investments that are done here, but so I can maximize the business value through technology and digital transformation so that we can transform CBA. And now, as we talk about these projects a bit, I talked about this in the beginning of our pipeline. We're really proud of this project pipeline in our entire value chain for aluminum. And here you have all of the different projects you've already seen in the past. We have a pipeline and strategy that is very robust. Despite everything that's going on in this year in 2023, we did not change our strategy. It's really a winning strategy. It makes sense, and we continue to perform this strategy. And along with this, we have all these different investments that also did not change. So we just extended the deadlines for these projects to be able to adapt to these. And we should be finishing this till 2027. And here you can see the values involved. And besides this, the acquisition of Alex, which was an amount we invested in last year. And on the left side, you can see everything we've already done. We restarted Hotline 3 along with an upgrade of our technology. So this is already using a new technology. We had all of the Metalex investments that I've already mentioned with the installation of a pot line and also the introduction of scraps. And all of this is in line with our strategy and our investment portfolio. On the right side, you can see we still have a lot of room for growth in pot line one to turn on again all of the technology as well, more investments in recycling, both of the investments that are going to be started in the beginning of next year, which is this dry disposal of waste and the real project. So these are all potential M&As, for example, the Hondon project and other possible projects with renewable energy. So all of this intends to say that having this portfolio that is so diversified is really important for us, but it's also really important for our competitive advantage at CBA because it helps us balance out investments according to the evolution of each one. And finally, to finish my presentation here on the next slide, I'm going to show you a bit of the CBA portfolio, as I mentioned in the initial slide, which is the main point about this at CBA is that we want to talk about our concept. We have four businesses that are very different. So, primary goods are more exposed to commodities. There's more um volatility and it relies more on the LME. So it's natural that this happens, and all of the primary aluminum producers in the world have this kind of behavior. So it's capital intensive, it requires investments, and since there's a higher return, there's also a higher risk. And the transformed metals and recycled metals are very similar characteristics. So you can buy the ingots, the material, the scraps, etc., and you process this and then you resell it. So there's a more stable margin, normally a little smaller than primary aluminum, and also a smaller volatility. So you have less risks, less returns, but it's still very attractive. So energy is something that's a little more long term, where you have these very long term perspectives, and you have a cost and revenue that's connected to some kind of indicator and margins that are also pretty stable and less volatile. That's why you have less returns and smaller risks. So, this is kind of the concept of this kind of business. When you look on the right side here, you can see that this matrix is already considering the CBA case, which is a little different. You can see our positioning in the business is not exactly like what I just mentioned because normally the recycling business and the transformed goods at CBA, since you have this kind of integration in supply chain and you have a lot of synergies that can be captured between businesses, leveraging volumes and costs, you have optimizations and you can have higher returns in recycling and in transformed goods. So we talk about this a lot. And this investment in recycling and transformed goods, it's very important because of the fact that you can have synergies in our business and leverage the returns. And then finally, back to our strategy. So you have the four pillars of our strategy that I just mentioned. And what's interesting to say is that this is like a photograph or an overview of our strategy in the past 12 months. So you can see there's a lot we did in 12 months, and there are things that are still in the oven to be delivered. We're still baking some of these points, but we're constantly looking at these four pillars and performing the initiatives according to the strategies to be able to deliver what we promised to you guys and to the market. And in the future, we're going to have a lot more of each of these points. So we'll have more investments to accelerate our growth. As I've already mentioned, we're searching for more investments in recycling. We want to strengthen our competitive advantages. I showed you we're in the second quartile, so there's more incentives to get back to the first quartile as soon as possible and improve our competitive advantages. So in the future, we can be back um, to our position that we consider fair or the right position for us. And we also want to influence the entire supply chain so they operate like this. And so they can have the same kind of standards because this is so important for any business now and in the future. And then finally, you have all of the digital transformation aspects, which is super important. It's still starting, but it does bring in major gains. And for any kind of business now or in the future, just as ESG, it's really fundamental. It's the basis to support all of our businesses that will come in the future. So that's pretty much it. And I finished my presentation here. But after, of course, I'll be available for Q&A. Now I'll invite Camila to join us and talk about the market perspectives and our year for 2024. Thank you, guys. Thanks, Luciano. Um, well, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you at CBA Day as the CFO this year. Pleasure to be with you guys, and thank you for being with us as well. I'm going to talk about our industry first in 2023 and our perspectives, and then how CBA is included in all of this. So, I'm starting off with like a photograph of the global industry in 2023. So, we have the primary aluminum consumption by China, which took place throughout 2023, and it was higher than the previous years, as you can see, which is very much connected to decarbonization demand. So we had major investments in the transportation segment, electric vehicles, and also structural investments that continue to take place in new capacities for solar energy. In the other regions on the left upper graph, you can see performance is a little weaker, but it did naturally monitor keep up with the industrial production that was a little weaker in the US and Europe in the last few quarters. But what we can see as positive is that there's a reduction in the stock levels, and this probably would lead to a recovery in prices next year. So on the right side graph, you can see supply demand balance. It's pretty balanced. It's neutral for 2023, and there's a perspective for a slight surplus. And it's important to highlight the amount of days of stock, which is an important reference for our industry. It is below what we consider as the balance point, which are 50 days. And we should finish the year with these 47, which tends to be an additional support for this price recovery that will take place quicker. And here on the next slide, you can see the LME behavior throughout 2023, which had a reduction throughout the second quarter. And the main explanation is related to reopening or increase of China's capacity, especially in the Hunan province, where you have the smelters that already had a restriction due to the water sources recently. So this was basically an additional capacity in the that's temporary without a relevant increase when you take a look at the capacity in 2023. On the right side graph, you have the premiums that are seen that have a drop throughout the year. But then when we look at the isolated premium, we consider healthy levels still because there was also a reduction in the logistical costs. The light gray is DDP Brazil, and there's normally less volatility, and because of our more stable demand in the domestic market. And so here you can see the industry costs on the left side graph. You can see the big peak after the pandemic in the costs of the main inputs in the production of liquid aluminum in industry. So here you can see the main factors that are associated to these different impacts and conflicts that lead to these kind of effects, such as a lack of stability in the supply chain, the energy crisis, especially what's more severe in China and Europe, and even the war with Russia and Ukraine that in this case really influenced the anode pace. So in 2023, this was an inversion of this trend. And so at the end of the day, there's a drop year over year of 7% in these costs and different items, which is really in line with what we have been saying at CBA about it being a little closer to 10% or so. Let's see how the year ends. But I think it's important to highlight 2 points here. The first is the cash costs, the production costs. So between buying the raw materials and having this going through the supply chain till the sale of the products, and with CBA, since we're integrated, this takes a little longer. And then you have this delay between what we see as a cost reduction, um, and then having this transfer to our results, which is what we're going to see in 2024. And this is mirrored in the cost of the industry as a whole. So, what we can see on the other hand, and so we can see that there's more smelters with pressured margins in the industry. Um, Here, I'm going to talk about the domestic demand. Uh, so, although there was an increase of the domestic production, the country continues to be a net importer, and the segments that had the best performance were transportation, civil construction, and energy throughout 2023. Other segments with lower performance, such as self building, which is more like for refurbishing smaller construction projects, or self construction and then or do it yourself, and packaging. These are two segments that are super sensitive to the economic situation. And with the resuming of economic activities and a reduction of interest rates and more inflation management, these segments will probably react quicker as well. But here it's important to also say that in the Brazilian industry, we had a major victory after years working on this, which was applying an anti dumping fee for imported laminated products that come from China. So the import process is significant in the laminated market, and so in other countries they had already moved towards measures like this. And so this was, of course, intensified, and now we started to consider the 15% anti-dumping fee since July this year. So this will probably make us reach a balance point in the competition environment for these products. And so we can see that there's a positive perspective on this point for next year. And when we look at the industry a little more up ahead with this vision in the next 5 years, we have a balance point that is still tight. So it's quite neutral. We're talking about 70 million tons. So this is practically neutral. And for the next years, according to the CRU vision, um, and the tight physical schedule is because the days of stock also have a pretty low level. So here, an important point is the issue where you have a lower offering of these new capacities seen in the world as a whole, and especially in China because they're getting closer to a capacity limit, which was self imposed, and which they have been mentioning they'll follow with the exchange and the energy matrix. And so we do expect to have some kind of growth in China. But, anyways, it should probably be a little uncertain. So we have different cost issues, we have different regulations, competition, etc., with other industries, and this generates some uncertainty about the capacity advances, which is a different future than what we've seen in the rest of industry. And that's why on the graph here on the left side, we can see China's behavior as a net importer for these metals in the next few years. So when we talk about the global demand, the average CAGR here and annual growth is close to 2%, above this increase in the supply. And here it's important to mention that the capacity level of the smelters is very high. So this generates another point for growth in prices with the recovery of the demand. So when we talk about the growth in the segment, we also have this 5 year vision, and the perspective is even more positive for Brazil. We have an average growth of 4.3% per year in this period, and the main markets in Brazil that stand out are packaging and transportation. Here we mentioned some highlights, but of course, you have movements towards many different initiatives and investments. So that includes the production of electrical vehicles, hybrid vehicles, and even investments in energy solutions overall. So our country has a lot of capacity for new solar power plants, auctions for transmission, and the distributed generation. As well as potential for this demand that comes from aluminum in our country. And here it's important to mention that electric vehicles use 40% more aluminum than combustion vehicles. So when we take a look at this price graph, you can see that in 2024, we had a perspective for gradual recovery that was really conditioned to the economic recovery. So there are signs of from different central banks about the drop in the interest rates. Eventually, this will come around. We'll have a higher inflation control, and this leads to direct reaction in our demand in the market as well as in other markets. So, for the mid and long term, we have from the capacity perspective, I've already mentioned greater discipline on the offering of new productions from China, which is super relevant. And from a demand perspective, we also have the electrification coming along. So at the end of the day, we have the use of aluminum and other new applications, substituting other materials and metals, and this generates greater support for price growth that can be significant. Then here, besides pricing, I want to talk about the margins because when we connect to everything I mentioned in the slide about the production costs for aluminum, we already had a slowdown of some important inputs that are very relevant in the cost breakdown, but there's more to come. And so, depending on the speed, this would make the industry's margins overall also strengthen itself. And then here, getting into CBA, we had a year that was very challenging in 2023. And that's also why we structured a plan with different initiatives to strengthen the company's competitive advantages. And this was structured with these three pillars. So I'm going to talk about the strengthening of our performance operationally and financial results. And the first item is the stability of our operation. So we were able to reestablish this throughout the second semester, and we started off in 2024 with this issue solved. So you have some collateral effects, and we did have an increase in our working capital, and especially here in the stocks where this was necessary. But we worked on this throughout the second semester with some divestments. So in the second quarter, we demonstrated significant divestments representing about 170 million, and this is what we expect to continue doing gradually in order to get back to our normality level within our policies in this aspect. So in a working capital, it's important to mention also that you have the tax credits, and this is a relevant account in our balance sheet. It's also part of our operation and our business dynamic to accumulate credit. We also search for constant solutions to monetize these credits. Uh, and we're going to, when it comes to optimizing the portfolio, it's also an ongoing effort at CBA. We have some examples of the Primora product line, which is something we launched about 1 year ago. And this grew. It was a pretty good year for uh, these extruded items along with the customized projects. So, our capacity to develop projects that are customized close to our customers and really advance in this will definitely bring in a mix um, with greater share of these products with added value. So then you have the monetization of non-operational assets. Um, and then besides this, you have some divestments in non-core products. And here we have the closing of São Miguel Paulista this year, the signing of the São Miguel Paulista, as well as the signing of the Nicolândia plant this year. And we hope to have the closing next year. So we have some other investments in non-core participations that will possibly lead to buyers, and we could have the conclusion of this operation in this sequence. Here on the capex, Luciano's already mentioned this. With the importance of these projects that have attractive returns. And what we decided to continue doing, that we're in an advanced stage of execution that generate attractive returns, already lead to um, an improvement in 2024. And so we can also have some savings in the costings in 2024. And you can also continue to sell as a fruit of our real product, which was a technology we have the patents for, and we'll have some margins from in 2024 as well. So when we talk about financial health, we have a pretty high leverage position. We ended the third quarter with 9.7 times net debt to EBITDA. You have two sides of this. I'm going to start talking about the EBITDA now with our operational stability and normalized operation. The EBITDA that always keeps up with the last 12 months will be gradually recovered. And so, with the transfer of the uh, lowering of the cost of some inputs as well, And the debt, which we captured about 1.5 billion additionally for debt. None of them are are short term. Our average term is 5 years to pay off our debts, and we did this to have our cash position more robust. We ended the third quarter with 1.3 billion in our cash position. Additionally, on the debt side, we also had some liability management work, postponing the amortizations that were going to expire in the next 3 years. So we're only going to have a relevant amortization from 2027 onwards, which will give us comfort and positions us in a situation where we have more financial solidity to go through this turbulent short term, since we don't have financial covenants in any of our contracts that are connected to CBA's performance. And then here on the third point, Luciano's already mentioned this, but we postponed some invested investments that were planned. But we can, of course, anticipate these because we really believe in this portfolio, and it will expand our competitive advantages even more, which are already strong in a world where we are looking towards decarbonization. So, decarbonization is not only a trend, it is a reality. We're already a preference for our customers. CBA's portfolio is 100% green. We wanted to anticipate demonstrations towards this, and when we launched the Millennium Seal, and we can really transmit this transparency about our products to our customers in the entire productive process, about the emissions and the recycled uh, content as well. So we definitely have had a very attractive differential at this point towards our customers. And here you have our customers potentially um, with more decarbonization concepts. And this increases the potential for consumption in metal. And so this leads to different maturity states on these fees upon carbonization. And so this is going to give us even more differentials between the low carbon producers, and in comparison with the high carbon producers, we're already considered a low carbon producer, and we're going to expand our investments even more in recycling. With this, I will end this main message from now. And I want to reinforce that the global market is really balanced out for 2023, but also for the future. So, greater discipline in our capacity offering is a key point. And the driver is an important move towards this, as you can have this important economic recovery. And in the mid to long term, we also have a lot of trends towards electrification. So here we also have aluminum bringing in more solutions, applications, and substituting other materials. And in 2023, besides some initiatives I would already mention, we were able to do our homework in the sense that we wanted to make our position more robust and more solid to go through the short term and really be ready to absorb all of these values in our future. Thank you so much, and I'll be available to answer questions during our Q&A session. Great. Excellent presentation, Camila. Now we have our participation from Julian Catto. He's our Senior VP at Wood Mackenzie, and he's going to add on to a bit of what Camila's already mentioned in regards to the energy transition. So I'll invite Julian to join us. Julian, welcome.
To listen to earlier. And firstly, I'd like to thank Luciano and the team for inviting me to give a perspective on the impact of the energy transition on the aluminium industry. And there's a rider here, which is how good can it be? And it could be very, very good for aluminium. But I'll step through some slides, and then obviously we'll have Q&A at the end. So different energy transition pathways drive demand in different ways. And obviously, we've just got to the end of COP28 with very, very few announcements that relate directly to mining and processing of minerals. However, one big announcement, which I thought was very interesting, perhaps for the investor community and for this audience, is the commitment to triple renewables. Which obviously by 2030, which is obviously very, very positive for aluminium as well as other mine commodities. So first of all, it's useful to just identify what the different pathways are. And so we have a base case which only achieves a 2.5-degree global warming outcome, which is pretty negative on the planet. But that is what the policy currently in place will drive. And of course, all of this has to be driven by policy as opposed to just pledges. And of course, many corporates and countries are committing to a net zero um, target of 2050. Some are at 2060, 2070. All of these accelerated pathways will require carbon taxes as a rather large stick to beat out carbon emissions. If you look at what we think will have to be in place by 2030, it's around about $100 a ton universal carbon tax. I'll leave it for you to decide whether you think that's possible or plausible, and a $175 carbon tax by 2040. That has major implications for the aluminium sector and indeed for profitability margins, depending on where you are on the emissions curve. So, making it a little bit more tangible, what do different pathways look like in terms of electric vehicles? Everyone likes to talk about them. Uh, Put simply, by 2030, we will need a 60% sales penetration, which is equivalent to around 80 million EVs being built and sold by 2030. We're currently at around about 15 million, so we've got a long way to go on that front. Um, an energy uh, that's a net zero target. Our existing target in terms of a base case is closer to 40 million EVs. That's because essentially we can't deliver the commodities to be able to build more EVs. Lithium ion battery demand, obviously, gigafactories are very, very popular with politicians. As far as our base case view, we have sufficient announced battery manufacturing capacity in place to meet targets that we have for a 2.5-degree world, but for a 1.5-degree world, we have to put in place um, a massive amount of capacity. We're talking about almost 4,000 gigawatt hours of additional battery manufacturing capacity with an investment of $350 billion by 2030. Extremely challenging. On renewables and power generation, of course, I've already mentioned that at COP28, there was an announcement that we were going to triple, or a commitment to triple renewables. And of course, when we think renewables, we automatically think about wind and solar. Now, speaking to the team, they believe that tripling renewables by 2030 is aligned with our 1.5-degree pathway. Now, that represents huge challenges for the mining and metals producing sector because the acceleration of demand from wind and solar will be truly transformational, particularly if we're on that 1.5-degree pathway. Now, what about intensity? So, in the pale green columns, you can see the different intensities of base metals, but particularly aluminium, in thermal power plants, offshore wind, solar, and indeed concentrated solar. Whilst concentrated solar won't be a major driver in the future, it will have some market share, and obviously it's very, very positive for aluminium. But if you think about solar photovoltaics, you've got a tenfold increase in intensity compared to a thermal power plant. Offshore wind, less intensive, but again, you've got a tripling of intensity. So the more we drive down the renewables route, the greater the demand there is for aluminium and indeed other mined commodities. And it's the same for electric vehicles. If you look at the intensity of a battery electric vehicle, on average, it contains just over 100 kilograms more aluminium than an ICE. And as we drive to more EVs, we are leveraging ourselves up to a requirement for aluminium, which is great if you're an aluminium producer. What does it all mean when you translate? And I've just highlighted the change in power generation and EVs. Obviously, aluminium has myriad uses. One that I didn't mention, but is related to the build out of renewables, is grid related consumption. so transmission and distribution. And here's where aluminium has an opportunity to significantly gain more market share, because the energy transition is all about infrastructure. It's about building out new infrastructure, new wind farms, new solar farms, etc. It all needs to be connected, and you can design aluminium in not just in ultra high tension cables, which is where aluminium is primarily used at the moment, but also for mid voltage. So this is why you have such a large boost to aluminium consumption. And the great thing, as far as electrical uses of aluminium, it has to be primary. So that's great. EVs is obviously the big one. We've discussed that. That really is very, very good for both primary and secondary aluminium consumption. So a massive increase in demand. And then you've got various growth in what can be overlooked, and that is what I call traditional old uses of aluminium. And it's the same for other metals. We can focus a little bit too much on energy transition uses, forgetting that aluminium is still used in packaging, machinery, equipment, buildings, and so it goes on. So a very, very healthy outlook that is boosted massively the closer we try and align to a 1.5 degree pathway. And you can see the numbers in the subheading. So a very, very positive news story for aluminium as far as um, trying to achieve net zero, or get as close as we can to it and that pathway. Um, Secondary aluminium, again, is often overlooked. And you'll know that CBA has recently made an investment in a secondary producer. And that there are a lot of benefits for that, which have been covered already, but I'll show you a few more benefits in terms of carbon emissions and costs. Um, so we already have, under our base case view, quite aggressive growth in secondary demand and supply, because that is the way that the world is going. We're looking to reuse, recycle more. But under an accelerated pathway, we need to get as much metal from everywhere. And that's why secondary demand grows much, much faster under a 1.5 degree pathway. So we're looking at around about 1.7 million tons per annum of additional supply and demand of secondary under a 1.5 degree pathway, which is pretty positive. Um, it doesn't negate the need for primary and primary development, but what it shows is that the market for secondary material is going to be very, very robust going forward for all the good reasons that we know. So, what are the primary supply requirements under the different scenarios that we show? Well, we like to show a supply gap analysis, and I've picked 2030 because it's what you might call the current investment cycle. And under our base case view, there is relatively little need for additional primary smelting capacity over and above what already exists and current commitments. So there's a small negative gap. So this is a gap in 2030 versus demand requirements. What you will see, and I'll talk a little bit about this later, is that for some other commodities, there are quite significant gaps, and copper is a very good example of that. Copper is the main competitor to, or the only competitor to aluminium in terms of energy transmission and distribution. And copper has a problem. It has a problem in developing supply that aluminium doesn't. So I'll talk a bit about that. Now, that's our base case. This is what happens when you try and align to a 1.5 degree pathway. The requirement for investment in mining, smelting, refining explodes. And even in aluminium, we would see, because of the mass deployment of renewables, of EVs, of all low carbon energy generation, distribution, consumption, it means that we would have to build significant additional primary smelting capacity to meet requirements. So in excess of a 10% supply gap. That represents a requirement to invest $70 billion in primary smelting, aluminum refining, and bauxite. And the question is, could we deploy that capital? So, a carbon tax is good or bad for aluminium, and really, you'll all know this. It depends where you sit on the carbon curve, and I'll take you through some of the opportunities and challenges. So, first of all, it's quite important to note that average carbon taxes imposed are only $36, which isn't high enough to drive change. What is driving change more than the carbon tax, the stick of the carbon tax, is declining carbon emissions caps, but also corporates aligning to a 1.5-degree pathway. That is forcing companies, due to their own discipline, because of their investors, because of society, wanting to go down the decarbonisation journey. And you've heard from various speakers um, previously about what CBA is doing in that front. It obviously is well placed given its low or zero carbon power supply. So quite a way to go in terms of having universal carbon taxes and policies applied, but we are making progress. Now, what about the carbon emissions curve? So this is a scope 1 and 2 plus the cradle to gate, so it includes transportation. It's not quite scope 3, but it's getting close to it, and it highlights the huge range of emissions that you see in the carbon intensity curve. You get around 18 to 20 tons per ton for coal-fired power generation. Read into that primarily China and India. And then you have the low end of the emissions curve getting close to what is deemed to be sustainable, so 4 tons per ton for the full value chain. So that includes bauxite, alumina, and smelting. At the low end of the curve, and obviously power supply is critical here. Hydropower supply, or indeed if you are able to supply using nuclear, is very, very positive. So what happens when you apply what was shown previously, which with previous presentations, which is an analysis of costs with carbon costs. And what we show here is we show the primary side of the equation, which is from about 25 million tons upwards, and then you've got secondary melters. So this is just highlighting how beneficial it is, in terms of the cost structure of the secondary industry, but also what a low carbon footprint it has, and therefore is relatively immune to carbon taxes. Also, what it highlights is that the top end of the emissions curve, which is very hard to abate, that will ultimately drive prices. So the marginal emitter will be the marginal cost, and it will be the marginal price. So what you can conclude from this is that when carbon taxes are at $100, because of the inability to abate at the top of the curve, the price will gravitate towards $4,000. So what are the implications of that for a high carbon emitter? Well, their costs go up and their revenue goes up by the same amount. So no net gain. If you're at the low end of the curve, you may know a company that is at the low end of the curve, that company will see extremely high margin expansion because they're relatively immune to the carbon tax. And so you will see outperformance in a carbon tax world and a low carbon world by producers with low carbon emissions. And that applies not just to primary, but also those primary producers that either own secondary or indeed pure secondary players. So having a primary secondary mix is very, very beneficial. Now, what about prices? What does this all mean for prices? And I've let the cat out of the bag in terms of high carbon tax world. So at $100 a ton carbon tax, what would that mean in terms of a long-term price? Well, again, if it's driven by marginal costs, you're looking at a price of around $4,000 cash. If we're looking at a $50 a ton carbon tax, and this all becomes a bit like religion, it depends what you believe. If you believe that $50 a ton will be the universal carbon tax, you can justify on marginal cost analysis a $3,000 a ton aluminium price. If you believe in $175 a ton carbon tax, the aluminium price moves to $5,500. So choose which carbon tax you believe in. Either way, it's very, very positive for a low cost, low carbon emitting primary and secondary producer. Then last but not least, aluminium competes with copper. And whilst aluminium will remain competitive and more competitive than the use of copper in cabling, existing infrastructure is very, very difficult to switch from copper to aluminium. So what will change in the future? Well, what changes in the future is the fact that we are building new infrastructure. which means you can design in aluminium and save costs. Yes, it is slightly less efficient, but I always struggle when people talk about efficiency because we seem to be willing to accept a wind turbine that runs at a 35% efficiency, but we seem to have a problem with 5% losses using aluminium cabling compared to copper. So there needs to be a bit of perspective. The other issue that we have is that, and this is to aluminium's advantage, is that there is no shortage of the ability to supply additional aluminium. It's just about capital allocation. There's no constraint on the resource base in terms of bauxite. It's different for copper. And so copper prices need to accelerate to above $10,000 a ton. That's great for aluminium because what it means is that aluminium can be competitive at, say, $3,500 a ton. If copper goes to $12,000 a ton, it means that aluminium can be 4,000 and remain competitive. So in terms of that competitive mix, aluminium is set very, very well against its main competitor for electrical uses because it's already cheaper. Yes, it will be impacted by carbon taxes, but copper prices need to increase massively to incentivize supply development, which means that aluminium prices can rise as well. So it's win-win. So with that, I will stop. Um, I'll leave you with one statement, which is that the energy transition starts and ends with metals. It's my phrase. I genuinely believe that's true, and aluminium is often overlooked as far as energy transition is concerned. I think we need to change that, and aluminium absolutely sits at the center of the energy transition. Thank you very much for your attention.
All right. Thank you so much, Julian, for the presentation. I would like to all continue with us so you can participate in the Q&A session that will also have Luciano Alves' participation and Camila Bauer, CFO. And all of you, please send your questions by the chat as we'll submit them directly to our participants. We already have a few questions that came in, and the first one is going to Julian. Julian, aluminum is one of the essential materials for a low carbon future. We know that average carbon emissions in industry is still pretty high, especially because China, one of the main global producers, uses thermal coal energy. So, how can the aluminum industry prepare for the decarbonization challenge? Is it possible to have some kind of a differentiation between the high and low carbon aluminum? And if yes, how would that happen?
Okay, well, I think really the question is asking, will there be a green premium for aluminium? Which is what we've talked about for, I would say, at least the last 5 years. If you think about the narrative that I shared around the inability of China to decarbonize fast enough, which will drive prices because of carbon taxes. Now, it doesn't even need China to impose carbon taxes. You just need CBAM, the EU CBAM, which then that will ultimately drive marginal emitter costs. So the question is, would you rather attach a $50 or $100 a ton premium for green low emissions metal, or would you rather have a boost of $1,600 to your realized price? I know which I would rather have. Um, that's my perspective in terms of the medium long term. Now, bringing it back to the here and now, we have seen European consumers willing to pay some premium, but it's relatively low for green or low carbon sustainable aluminium. We haven't seen US consumers willing to do so. Now, that may be driven by the fact that the US has got access to low carbon aluminium supply from Canada. Um, so, do I think a green premium will exist? Yes. Will it be dwarfed by the carbon tax impact? Yes.
Thank you so much, Julian. And guys, please remember to send your questions by chat. We do have a few other ones. The first one is coming from Danielle Sasson from Itaú BBA. and it's headed towards Camila. So, Camila, if you could talk about the outlook of supply and demand globally for 2024, with the property sector still quite weak in China, but with the operations getting back in 2023. But how have you guys looked at volumes for 2024 versus 2023? Considering a demand that's not that high on one side, but the resuming of our pot line 3 as well on the other hand. So when it comes to China, we still have some construction markets with uncertainties, but there's also strong demand, as I mentioned, from electric vehicles and transportation, solar, which has been growing month after month, surprising recent data, which can lead to a positive net for growth in order to continue this movement in 2023 and still be a little stronger in 2024. When we consider demand in Brazil, we also have positive perspectives. So we're operating full in our operation with pot line 3 restarted. And we are going to start 2024 pretty strong. And we always have demand for everything, but it's always about our mix of sales of products. So we have sectors that could grow more, such as aluminum and silicon, and it tends to be even better in 2024. And billets should recover with self construction. So there is a demand trend with an optimization in our mix that would be supported even if there is a possible additional capacity in Brazil. But that could also include some different markets with a growing demand. The country continues to be a net importer, and that reinforces the fact that we're operating very close to most of our customers. This is a big logistical differential, and the fact that we're also the only one in Brazil that's integrated. So, with this bigger portfolio, we have more flexibility in this mix to be able to sustain some demand next year. Thank you, Camila. Now we have another one here from uh, Leonardo Neraci from Bank of America to Luciano. We also highlighted a possible upside growth in M&A. We've always talked about this and some organic projects as well, potentially, and probably focused on transformed goods and recycle. But he wanted to understand a bit more about this topic as we consider the different projects and opportunities in both growth possibilities and what's the minimum level of returns on investments required for these kind of sectors, and what should we expect about the timing. The drop in leverage should be taking place before any additional investments or not necessarily. Well, Leonardo, we have our pipeline of projects that continues with its execution, as I mentioned in the presentation. So, of course, we have all of the financial aspects that Camille also mentioned, which are probably a priority for us with our higher cash generation expected, as well as other initiatives that could bring in more cash to the business. There is another issue with reducing our leverage position at some point in time in the future. But regardless of this, we also have other investments that we can work on, as you mentioned. And we've talked about this a lot in recycling and some investments also that are in-house. So investments that are in our own operation, adding capacity, efficiency, and even processing some products where we could have greater volume with more recycled content. So there's a potential to increase the recycled uh, content of our products compared to what we have currently. Possible M&As or other movements in this direction, I think this is going to be a long-term horizon, maybe not for 2024. When I think about who possible acquisitions, I think we're focused more on the internal aspects of these projects that are under execution and other opportunities in house. But anyways, for us, we're following a pretty good growth pace and evolution, even with everything that took place this year. And we still have a lot of initiatives of improvements, such as Camila mentioned, our cash position and operational improvements in our business that will allow us to accelerate investments a bit more when adequate. Okay, thanks, Luciano. So just adding on here to this CapEx topic, still from Leonardo Neraci from Bank of America. It's about the CapEx. I want to know what's the budget for 2024 and what's the sustaining target level of the long-term CapEx since we consider all of the projects delivered in the pipeline. So still about this topic, Caio Guirener from BTG also talks about if we actually reviewed the values for CapEx projects and there was a scope change or if this was just an inflation aspect. Great. So first about the investments, about our investments, we can't provide guidance, right? But what we can say is that we had all of that pipeline from 2.5 billion reais of investments that were announced, that were approved under execution, and throughout this year we were postponing some of these projects. So there's some natural inertia of this kind of investment. So what we are going to perform is most likely going to be very similar to next year when you look at the volumes. But when it comes to sustaining this, we have also some refurbishing of some pot lines and investments for the maintenance of our business that are normally around 400 and 500 million. Um, in best market conditions, we could be closer to 500 million. And in moments like the current scenario, maybe closer to 400, but this is pretty much our range. And when Kai's question about investments, basically, it's the evolution of the inflation, Caio. But I want to remind you that in the recycling investments that we consider in that slide, we have the Alex values. So it's not only CapEx, right? You have the CapEx we've done at Metalex and CBA to invest in recycling, but we also have the acquisition of Alex. So that's probably why we had greater inflation, but that's because of the additional M&A. And with all the rest, it's just like an evolution of the inflation, and there's no major surprises when it comes to increasing investment levels. So at this point in time, we're reviewing this portfolio and this pipeline. We have been following execution as expected. We've already performed a lot. So Potline 3 and the disposal of the dry waste and residue, which will be started. And in practical terms, these investments have already been done. So how are we going to scale this up with the rest of the portfolio up ahead from now on? Okay, thank you, Leonardo and Caio, for the questions, and thank you, Luciano. We have one more point here, which are some questions on costs now. Danielle Sasson was asking about how we are looking at the outlook for costs in 2024, the 15% drop that Leonardo Naracci also talked about here in the earnings call in the third quarter, where we talked about a drop of 15%, looking at the year over year scenario, and if this is valid still, right? If it continues to be applicable, and what's the expectation looking at the year of 2024? And Camila Bider, also from Bradesco BBI, she asks about this possible drop quarter over quarter and the cash cost. But if we have some kind of estimate of when we would get back to the levels in 2021 and 22. Well, yeah, I think starting off here with 2023, we do have a horizon of reaching close to the 15%. Of course, you have some of the currency variations, but this is the order we're following. And this is the cash cost. So you have a transfer in the CPV in 2024, and about the cash cost in 2024, it's really hard to foresee this. Some items will probably slow down a bit and drop on a downturn, but this is mainly the anode pace. But the speed in this, in which this is going to happen, because it involves production in each industry separately, and some of these items are inputs that could be used in new trends. So it's really difficult to foresee the speed in which this is going to happen. But from a cost transfer perspective, yes, we do have vision on this. You had asked about something else besides the cash cost. I think you talked about the drop of 15%. And if we expect to get back to the levels in 21 or those levels in 22, yeah, when? Well, then the uncertainty is greater because I think there's an issue with our energy items. And if we continue to keep up with the level, which is where we have the cash costs, and that's really competitive. So here we have a discussion on the renewals and how and the speed in which this is going to take place. And this is something that could influence our cash costs in the next few years. Anyways, Brazil is a country with a supply that's very competitive for new energies. So although we don't renew our power plants, depending on the negotiations there are many new sources, wind power and solar, that would complement this with other alternatives for investments that would keep us competitive on this item. Now, to talk about the other items, it's going to be a little more complicated. Well, if I can add on to your point, I want to remind you that in 2024, we won't have the impact of the instability of the pot line. So, naturally, for the global costs, this is a positive impact because we did have some impacts this year with the operational instability we had. And when we talk about the returns on costs to historical levels, we are normally very careful about this. So, some of these inputs had so natural gas, petroleum coke, and in this case, they did have a slowdown, but they didn't get back to the historical levels. So there is some uncertainty about if they will resume these levels, and then that doesn't impact only CBA; it impacts the entire industry. But there are other costs like caustic sodium, and there was a big price peak, but they also recovered really fast. But then, of course, you have major volatility because it's a commodity that depends on this supply demand equation, right? So, all of this to say that each of these inputs behaves in a different way. And getting back to the list, the previous level really depends on how this will behave from now on. Well, thanks, Camila and Luciano. Thank you, Leonardo and Daniel and Camila, for the question. I'm going to add on to this, which is kind of related to cost as well here, Camila. And besides an improvement in EBITDA that comes from this normalization, we also mention a drop in the leverage that could come from an operational cash generation process. And so Leonardo Nerac from Bank of America asks for some of the details of these initiatives that could help with this drop in the leverage position. So it's important to also mention that for the operational cash generation, we have the working capital. So some of the stocks I mentioned, because we had investments in the first semester this year that were greater as a collateral effect of the need for stability operationally. And in the second semester, we also had a shift in the trend for divestments. We relatively invested in the second quarter, but we have room for even more investments throughout next year. But we still have room for this. And another point that's important to mention that I want to reinforce is the tax credit. So ICMS is relevant. This is one point. And we have a series of different initiatives that with this evolution we can, as they evolve, we can communicate on. And they also involve the um, credits that we generate for possible commercialization, as well as the optimization of the use, which reinforces this operational cash position. These are some of the main initiatives, and the other ones are maybe a little less relevant. But about the divestments of what we've already done, so we have amounts to be received from São Miguel, Paulista, and Niquelândia. And so these resources that would come from these divestments of non-core investments could also impact this. All right, perfect. Thank you. So I think another point here that could influence this is cost reduction, which is the EBITDA, but possible upside as well. The aluminum prices that could influence this. And in this sense, I have a question for Julian. So, Julian, how would the energy transition impact the long-term prices of aluminum?
Okay, in terms of the long-term prices, if you assume a $100 a ton carbon tax, um, that will inflate um, costs or prices to around about $4,000 a ton in real terms. At $50 a ton, it's about $3,000, which is obviously significantly higher than it is today. And just to give you an idea, for a producer that is at 4 tons of carbon per ton of aluminium for full value chain, uh, that increases their cost by $400. So if the price goes up by 1,000 and their costs go up by 400, they see an increase in their margin of $600. So happy days. The other thing that I think is quite important is to say that if carbon taxes are to have the effect that they are supposed to, this will be transient. So once the carbon has been driven out, then the top of the cost curve will come down. But that won't be for 10 to 15 years. We're looking at a very, very long term requirement to decarbonize power supply. Um, so, um, as I said in my presentation, you pick a number between 3 and 5,000.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Julian. Well, we have a few other questions here. The next one is for Camila once again. What could be expected? This is from Caio Grena from BTG Pactual. What could we expect when it comes to the volumes of sales and mixes for the next year? Can we expect a growth? Well, I think the full volume remains, and growth is kind of in line with what I answered in the first question about the optimization of the mix. I think we have opportunities here with silicon, billets, etc. Primor as well, the extruded um, profile items that have been growing in our portfolio as well. And here we also have the anti-dumping issue. So having the 15% coming in will also generate some kind of a reaction in the demand or some rebalancing in these domestic market, which is a product that has less barriers. So there is heavy competition from China, and we expect a better dynamic. With this, we'll be able to expect products with more VP as well. Okay, thank you, Camila. Thanks, Caio. And the next one is going to be directed towards Luciano about the recent increase in capital that we've announced. And considering the high maturity of the debt, which till from 2027 onwards, we have our debt concentration, the balance sheet is still healthy. So having said that, which would be the potential additional divestments of assets that are not strategic to the business that could help reinforce this cash position? Do we have any news towards this? Yeah, so not much news besides what we talked about in the end of the third quarter, but we had a really comfortable cash position. And then we still have some divestments, also in working capitals that we had to do. So these are happening now. Camila just mentioned we still have something else coming in gradually for the next year. And this also improves our cash position. So from the divestments, we have a lot of things that are lower, but together they'll be relevant. What Camila mentioned, the team had a Precatorio sale as well this year. And from the non-strategic assets, we have Nickel, which is already under execution. We're just waiting on the receipt of these amounts from São Miguel Paulista and Niquelândia in the terms defined. Tamunarchi, which is another point we also highlighted with the availability for the sale, and other non-core assets that are similar that we would focus our attention on and operation on, considering what is most important to us, which is aluminum and all of the supply chain, as I mentioned, which has a lot of investments to be made. So it's just about choosing how these movements will take place and how we'll focus our investments from now on. Thank you, Luciano. Guys, we're reaching the end of our event here. We still have another question. If you guys want to send any other questions, also we have time for them. And the next question is coming from an investor, Marco Aurelio, from GTI Administration, and he asks us to explore a bit more about how we are thinking of increasing the recycled content at CBA and what's the optimal percentage we can reach, in our opinion. Well, Luciana, I think you can add to that, but just want to remind you that we currently produce 380,000 tons of liquid aluminum, and we add between 120 and 130 tons of scraps depending on the sales mix. And if we sell a mix that is richer in billets or in sheets, then we have a greater content, which is why you also have an increase in volumes. Not because we produce more, but because our sales required products that have greater scraps levels. So that's pretty much the concept. But then for the future, it's hard to foresee a percentage. I'd say that today we are below what the potential could be for recyclable content. And why is that? Well, it's not an intentional decision here, but we do have this manufacturing production plant that's prepared to receive all of the liquid aluminum from the pot line. So we add the scraps according to our possibilities, and obviously whatever makes sense in this sales mix, right? So if we add more capacity in our pot lines, we can accelerate this and increase the content. We've already done part of this investment. We are prepared to increase our volume of recycled. So we should have 60 to 80% of the potential increase in recycled contents. And besides this, there's a lot we can do in CBA with limited investments that are more marginal and can be done later on. So we're really focused on this initiative, and we have potential to accelerate this. And this actually just considers a increase in volume and sales. We still don't have the differential since it's a recycled product, and but there is a future potential. It's really interesting. So having this percentage and portfolio with more higher recycled contents will help us to have a differentiation in our prices as well. Okay, thank you, Luciana. Thank you, Marco Aurelio, for this. The questions that were not answered, the IR team will always be available to answer. And me, Luciana, Camila, just send us an email, and it'll be a pleasure to help you. We wanted to once again thank you all for your participation, and thank Julian for your participation. Thank you for being with us today. I want to thank everyone that was connected to us as well, that has sent questions. I'm going to say bye now, but I'll pass the floor on to Luciano for his final comments. Please, Luciano. Thank you, Amably. Guys, thanks once again for another CBA day. It's always a pleasure to be with you and to be able to share CBA in greater details. And having this transparency, demonstrating what we're doing. And we're available here with our IR team and the investor relations channels at CBA to solve any other kind of additional questions you may have. And count on us, and we'll see you at our next earnings call.